Making the headlines today, former MIC President Sami Velu passes away. No need for IMF loan. Malaysia is not bankrupt. This just in, a former MIC President and long-time Minister Tun S. Sami Velu died this morning. He was 86. His death was announced by another MIC veteran, Dato' Sri Dr. S. Subramaniam. Velu was the 7th MIC President and also the ethnic Indian Party's longest serving, holding the position for 31 years. He was Sungai Siput MP from September 1974 to March 2008 and among the longest serving ministers lasting 29 years. He served as Works Minister from June 1983 to June 1989 and held that post again from May 1995 to March 2008. He also held the ministerial portfolios for energy and telecommunications from June 1989 to May 1995, as well as works and public amenities from September 1979 to June 1983. Funeral arrangements for Tun Sami Velu will be announced later. The meeting of the top 5 leaders of UMNO to discuss the 15th general election scheduled on Saturday has been postponed to a date to be announced later. Prime Minister Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob said this followed the announcement of UMNO Secretary General that the Special Supreme Council MT meeting, which should have been held on the same day, has also been similarly postponed.
Sebelum next MT lah nanti. Sebelum MT akan datang lah mungkin bincang balik. Maknanya biasanya macam itulah. Sebelum MT ada top 5. Sebelum MT biasa ada top 5, ada biro politik. Lepas tu malam MT. Minggu ni tak ada lah. 17 tak ada. Tangguh. Akan datang tu tunggu sesagung lah, dia akan umumkan tadi.
Earlier, Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri, who is UMNO Vice President, said the meeting of the top leaders would be held earlier before the tabling of Budget 2023, scheduled on 7th October. The top 5 UMNO leaders refer to the President, Deputy President and the 3 Vice Presidents of the party. In this regard, Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri stressed the commitment of the government to providing media the freedom to report news accurately and responsibly. He said as long as the report is valid, not slender, and is responsible, there will be no problem from the legal aspect. The Premier said this when asked about allegations of political meddling in a media organisation. On another note, Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri said the government will continue to be committed to ensuring that its policies prioritise the need to preserve the wealth of the nation's biodiversity. He said the government was also committed to ensuring that the pace of the country's development is environmentally friendly for the benefit of future generations. Citing the impact of participation in Expo 2020 Dubai as an example, the Premier said it would contribute to economic recovery and the development of the country in the future through trade cooperation, including the introduction of green smart homes, the use of artificial intelligence AI in agriculture, clean energy and several other future solutions.
Dedikasi yang tinggi dan kerjasama erat melalui pendekatan whole of government telah menjadikan Pavilion Malaysia satu platform yang berkesan bagi perkongsian idea serta berjaya mengetengahkan potensi negara untuk menerajui agenda kelestarian global.
Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri added that the Malaysian Pavilion is a symbol of success of the Malaysian family when its values are translated into a strong plan of action and a unified attitude in achieving harmony, progress, sustainability and stability. He said inclusive and sustainable development had also been the backbone of Malaysia's growth, where renewable energy, a people-centric economy, green technology and climate change mitigation were among the drivers of economic empowerment. Finance Minister Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz has asserted that the International Monetary Fund IMF never stated that Malaysia has economic problems that will cause the country to go bankrupt. Instead, it is confident of the country's growth prospects. He also said that S&P Global Ratings also expects that Malaysia's economic policy formulation will put the country in a stronger fiscal position. The Finance Minister said this in response to a viral video on social media that said Malaysia needs financial aid from the IMF as it faces bankruptcy. What is important is that Malaysia is disciplined in paying its debt obligations, the Finance Minister said, pointing out that Malaysia has never failed to pay debts that had matured.
IMF sendiri mengakui bahawa kedudukan hutang Malaysia masih diparas terurus. IMF dibayar oleh firma rundingan ke untuk cakap macam tu? Keenam, kalau kita bandingkan indikator ekonomi Malaysia dan beberapa negara lain, adalah jelas bahawa ekonomi kita kekal kukuh walaupun terpaksa berhadapan dengan cabaran pandemik COVID-19 serta ketegangan geopolitik yang sudah berlanjutan semenjak hujung Mac yang telah meningkatkan harga bahan api dan makanan. Jadi, kemungkinan untuk negara bankrupt ni dan perlu meminjam dari IMF adalah tidak benar sama sekali.
Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul noted that as of the end of June this year, the national debt level was about 60%, far lower than the statutory debt ceiling of 65%. The accusations that the Special Task Force on Jihad Against Inflation had failed to control the price of goods and that it should be disbanded are irrelevant. The task force chairman Tan Sri Anwar Musa, who is also Minister of Communications and Multimedia, said the task force was also accused of failing to control the increase in overnight policy rate OPR, which was announced by Bank Negara Malaysia BNM recently. He said the team would not be disbanded but would continue to work hard to ensure that the prices of goods can be controlled to help the people, especially those with low income. The chairman added that if the prices of goods increase, the government would take intervention measures to help the people. He said the prices of goods in the country are still under control and very much cheaper compared to neighbouring countries, and this has given rise to smuggling. As such, he said the government would beef up border control to ensure that goods from Malaysia are not diverted to neighbouring countries. Senior Defence Minister Datuk Seri Shammuddin Tun Hussein said the handover of the first littoral combat ship LCS to the Royal Malaysian Navy RMN is still within the timeline as announced earlier.
Kita pegang kepada apa yang kita dah umumkan sebelum ini. We are all on the same page. PAT, Panglima Tentera Laut, MINDEF, Baustet, Kementerian Kewangan, MOF, dan juga EPU sehinggalah kepada Kabinet. Jadi kita punya timeline daripada dulu lagi, pertamanya untuk yakinkan pada orang ramai bahawa projek LCS ni mesti diteruskan. Keduanya, kita tidak akan melindungi sesiapa yang bersalah kalau sekiranya ada salah guna dan penyelewengan.
The senior minister was commenting on a local media reports on the delay in the date of delivery for LCS in a special interview with Malaysian Armed Forces MAF Chief General Tan Sri Afendi Buang in conjunction with the 89th MAF Day. In August, MINDEF was given 6 months to mobilise efforts to revive the project, and he believes the first ship will be received by RMN in 2 years.
Why do we tell you stories?
Relevant,
New,
efficient,
accurate.
reliable. We bring you extraordinary stories from around the world, from politicians, bankers, and even your favorite celebrities. This and many more on RTM's English News.
PM resigns after right and far-right poll win. That and more coming up in the foreign segment. The UN chief has made an urgent appeal to the world leaders to act on climate change and lower the temperature so as not to drown the world after visiting flood-hit Pakistan. Speaking in a news conference days before dozens of global leaders are due to arrive in New York for the UN General Assembly High-Level Week, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "What is happening in Pakistan demonstrates the sheer inadequacy of global response to the climate crisis and the betrayal and injustice at the heart of it."
I have just returned from Pakistan, where I looked through a window into the future. A future of permanent and ubiquitous climate chaos on an unimaginable scale. Devastating loss of life, enormous human suffering, and massive damage to infrastructure and livelihoods.
Nearly 1,400 people died in flooding in Pakistan that covers an area the size of the United Kingdom and wiped out crops and destroyed homes, businesses, roads and bridges. Guterres said on his visit he had never seen climate carnage on such a scale, blaming wealthier countries for the devastation.
So my message to world leaders gathering here is clear. Lower the temperature now. Don't flood the world today. Don't drown it tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, the General Assembly is meeting at a time of great peril.
Jordanian rescue teams kept searching for 10 people still missing under the rubble of a collapsed 4-story building in Amman, where 5 bodies were recovered the day before. Anxious relatives waited at the disaster site in downtown Amman, where emergency services were racing against the clock to dig any survivors from the debris of the residential building. Government spokesman Faisal Shabal said 10 people are still under the rubble of the collapsed building, adding that some of them are still alive. According to an eyewitness who asked not to be identified, rescue workers, some toiling by hand, had been able to communicate with at least 3 trapped people. The head of the Civil Defence Service, Hatem Jabber, said more than 300 civil defence personnel have taken part in the search for those trapped under the rubble. The site was cordoned off yesterday morning and police stopped local residents from approaching it to avoid hampering the search operation. Jordan's Deputy Prime Minister Taufik Krishnan had told State Television that among the reasons for the collapse of the building is that it is old and dilapidated. A judicial source told the media that the Public Prosecutor's Office had opened an investigation into the collapse of the building. Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson yesterday announced that she would resign after an unprecedented right-wing and far-right bloc narrowly won Sunday's election. Out of the Swedish Parliament's 349 seats, the right-wing opposition was set to win 176, thanks in part to a surge by far-right Sweden Democrats SD, with over 99% of districts counted. Speaking at a press conference, Andersson, Social Democrats party leader, noted that it was a narrow majority, but a majority nonetheless.
We knew all the way that this would be most opinion polls showed us that there would be a close race in the election. So I was not surprised that it went this way rather than the other way. I knew that could happen. But of course, I am concerned with how the development in Sweden will be in the coming years.
Sunday's elections were so close that tens of thousands of votes from abroad and those cast in advance had to be counted to validate the results. Never before has the Swedish government relied on the support of anti-immigration and nationalists SD, who became the big winners of the vote by gaining more than 3 percentage points. With 20.6% of votes counted so far, the party emerged as Sweden's second largest party behind the Social Democrats, which have dominated Swedish politics since the 1930s. However, the post of Prime Minister will in all likelihood go to the leader of the moderate party. of Kristersson as SD leader Jimmy Åkesson is unable to unite all four parties to head the government. Kristersson, a former gymnast, led a major U-turn for his party when initiating exploratory talks in 2019 with the Sweden Democrats and then deepening their cooperation. The Christian Democrats and to a lesser extent the Liberals later followed suit. At the same time, the thorny question remains of whether the far right would be given cabinet posts, which Åkesson said late Sunday was their goal. The Sweden Democrats rose up out of neo-Nazi groups and the Keep Sweden Swedish movement in the early 1990s, entering parliament in 2010 with 5.7% of votes. After a long and patient wait in the sun and the rain, the first members of the public filed past the casket of Queen Elizabeth II in London yesterday as she lay in the state in the 925-year-old Westminster Hall. At the head of the 4-kilometre queue, well-wishers had camped out for 48 hours in order to pay their respects in front of the flag-shrouded coffin, which was brought from Buckingham Palace earlier in the day. In somber scenes, many people stopped and bowed or curtsied towards the coffin while others crossed themselves or removed their hats. Old soldiers stopped and gave one last salute to their former commander-in-chief. To the strains of a military band playing funeral marches, King Charles III led the royal family in procession to Westminster Hall behind a horse-drawn gun carriage bearing the coffin. The new king, his siblings and sons, Princes William and Harry, walked at 75 steps a minute behind the gun carriage as the Big Ben bell tolled from the Elizabeth Tower at the Houses of Parliament and guns fired regular salutes from Hyde Park. The lying in state began with a short Anglican service before black-clad members of Parliament, including new Prime Minister Liz Truss, filed past the coffin, which will be on display for 5 days around the clock. France will cap an expected increase in natural gas and electricity prices at 15% early next year, extending price controls introduced after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne said the caps will apply to domestic consumers and small companies, and so-called energy checks from 100 to 200 euros will also be given to some 12 million lower-income households to help with the winter heating bills. The new measures are less far-reaching than caps introduced earlier this year that limited domestic electricity price rises to 4% and fixed gas prices at October 2021 levels, which has contributed to lower inflation in France than in neighbouring European nations. In total, the government's capping measures next year are expected to cost 16 billion euros. Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said at the conference, with 11 billion going toward gas and 5 billion on electricity. Borne said the only restraint of energy consumption and European solidarity will allow France to avoid cuts and rationing in the worst-case scenarios, like an especially cold winter combined with supply problems. But she added that in the most likely scenarios, there will be no cuts if everyone acts responsibly. Fresh of recent legislative victories, U.S. President Joe Biden touted an electric auto future as the new generation model shared the stage with gasoline at the revived Detroit Auto Show. Biden's appearance comes just weeks after the U.S. president signed into law major new investments in semiconductor production and combating climate change.
Look, folks, the Great American Road Trip is going to be fully electrified. Whether you're driving coast to coast along I-10 or on I-75 here in Michigan. Charging stations will be up and easy to find as gas stations are now. We're also going to invest $7 billion to make American car companies and have the batteries and other critical materials they need.
The visit by Biden, a self-professed car guy, has boosted the profile of the Detroit gathering, which is much smaller than in years past, with most foreign automakers and newer players like Tesla not presenting. While gasoline-powered cars still dominate U.S. roads, Detroit auto giants have unveiled more EVs as they seek to wrest control of a growing market from Tesla and newer upstarts. but the Detroit show has otherwise been short of the sort of glitzy reveals of years past, a shift that partly reflects changing preferences of companies who now prefer to market directly to consumers in online launch events. Next in sports, Haaland hurts Dortmund with brilliant late strike. Stay with us. We begin the sports segment with Sukan Malaysia's development. Melaka's wushu exponents stamped their class at the wushu arena to sweep 5 of the 7 gold medals at stake and help the state lead the medal tally as the 20th KL Sukma competitions kicked off yesterday. In the wushu category, 7 gold medals were offered, but Melaka exponents swept 5 gold, 2 silver and a bronze medal to head the medal tally, while Johor is in the second spot with 4 gold medals. Melaka's 18-year-old Brian T. Kaiji presented the state's first goal through the men's Nan Chuan. 3 more came from the women exponents, namely Sydney Chin Si Xuan from Tai Chi Chien, Tan Peiler Nan Chuan, Tammy Tan, Tui Ling, Zhenshu, while Ang Chi Yue capped a fruitful day by winning the men's Zhenshu.
Saya sangat berpuas hati dengan performance saya sebab saya pun tak expect saya akan dapat medal ni. Coach tak bagi yang specific punya goal for us, but just ask us to do our best in our performance.
Johor, who are second, meanwhile, picked up 4 gold and 3 silver from the wushu and cycling events. On to football. Malaysia didn't get the ideal start and only managed to secure a point in the opening match of Group E in the Under-20 Asian Cup Football Qualifier campaign as they drew 1-1 with host Mongolia in Ulaanbaatar yesterday. The Group E tie got off to an intense start as both teams threw caution to the wind in search of goals. Hassan Sazali Waras's boys were far more dominant in ball possession, but it was the hosts who scored first when they were awarded a penalty that was converted by Bunyanemek Ganbat in 24th minute. The Harimau Muda squad, however, refused to lie down and redoubled their efforts in search of the equaliser, which duly came 9 minutes after the restart when Alif Izwan slotted home a pass from Najmuddin Akmal. In earlier match, South Korea crushed Sri Lanka 6-0 and were launched to the top of Group E, standing with Malaysia and Mongolia trailing with 1 point each. Malaysia will take on Sri Lanka on Friday before the crucial tie against South Korea on Sunday. Only the top 10 group winners and 5 best runners-up will advance to the Asian Cup finals in Uzbekistan next March. In the European Champions League, Erling Haaland's stunning strike completed a 2-1 comeback win for Manchester City against his former club Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League earlier this morning. The Bundesliga club went ahead through English midfielder Jude Bellingham, but City equalised through John Stones, and Haaland's acrobatic finish won it late on. Haaland bagged his 13th goal in all competitions for City as he came away smiling in the first reunion with his former side. The first half was a very timid affair with only 1 attempt on target between the two sides. However, the game came alive after 56 minutes when Bellingham nodded home into an empty net from a Marco Reus cross. City equalised after 80 minutes and scored with the first shot on target as Stones' long-range effort flew past Alexander Meyer. 3 minutes later, City were ahead with Joao Cancelo produced a stunning cross and Haaland found the back of the net with an acrobatic finish. City, who won their opening group game against Sevilla 4-0, topped the standings on 6 points, 3 ahead of the Germans. In another match, Real Madrid scored 2 late goals to beat RB Leipzig in their second Champions League game of the season at the Bernabeu. The first half was rather flat with very few chances of note for either side, the best opportunity falling to Marco Rose's side in just his second game in charge as Timo Werner scooped a ball through to Christopher Nkunku, but his shot was smothered by Thibaut Courtois. Los Blancos did have a big penalty shout as Luka Modric was seemingly pushed by Javier Schlager in the back, but nothing was given. The second 45 minutes continued to lack intensity as both sides struggled to create many clear-cut chances, but Real Madrid's quality was eventually the difference as Vinicius Jr. found Federico Valverde on the edge of the box, who fired in with his weaker foot with 10 minutes remaining. Marcos Asensio then scored with a fine first-time finish in injury time to make sure of the win, which puts Real Madrid top of Group F with 6 points from 2 matches. Shakhtar Donetsk are in second place on 4 points after their draw with Celtic. On to motorsports. Williams Formula One driver Alex Albon has left hospital in Italy and gone home to Monaco after missing Sunday's Italian Grand Prix with appendicitis and respiratory failure. Williams on Monday said that Albon had suffered unexpected post-operative anesthetic complications which led to respiratory failure. He was transferred to the nearby San Gerardo Hospital for surgery but ended up in intensive care and required assistance with breathing. The Williams driver was then taken off the ventilator on Saturday before being released from hospital on Tuesday. Albon, who was born in London but races under a Thai flag, took part in practice in Monza on Friday. However, he felt unwell the following morning and was replaced by reserve driver and Formula E champion Nick de Vries. The 27-year-old Dutchman finished in 9th place to score points on his F1 debut. Albon will be hopeful of returning to the grid for the next race in Singapore on 2nd October. That ends today's updates at noon. Wrapping up with a reminder of our top story. Former MIC President Sami Velu passes away. Tune in to News at 10 coming up at 10 p.m. on saluran Berita RTM. Or you can stream the channel on YouTube or RTM Click's web portal and mobile app. I'm Renee Fong. Stay tuned to TV2. Have a pleasant afternoon.